morning and welcome to Rising. Hope everyone had a good Labor Day weekend. We unfortunately have some somber news to get to. Now, Israel is on even greater edge as its war in Gaza stumbles into the 11th month. There was news over the weekend that the bodies of 6 hostages had been retrieved from tunnels in Gaza, sent the world reeling. The 6 include one American Israeli, Hersh Goldberg Poland, were killed. His mother, who just spoke at the DNC, spoke movingly at his burial.
For 23 years, I was privileged to have the most stunning honor to be Hersh's mama. I'll take it and say thank you. I just wish it had been for longer.
Hundreds of thousands of Israeli protesters spilled into the streets, demanding its leader make a deal to end the war and bring remaining hostages home. But Benjamin Netanyahu remains defiant.
I apologize to you that we have not been able to bring them back alive. We were close, but we were not successful. And I repeat again this evening, Israel will not act as if nothing has happened during this massacre. Hamas will pay a very heavy price for this.
The world is hardening its rhetoric, if not its stance, against Israel's leaders. The UK announced it would stop selling some arms to Israel. President Biden said that Netanyahu was not doing enough, and VP Harris posted this on X. Today, the president and I met with the U.S. hostages deal negotiation team. The murder of Hersh Goldberg Poland and 5 other hostages was a brutal, barbaric act by Hamas terrorists. As the president said, Hamas's leaders will pay for those crimes. It's long past time for a ceasefire and hostage deal. We need to bring the hostages home and end the suffering in Gaza. That was from Kamala Harris. So what do you make of this development, Jessica?
Right. So the amount of people in the streets in Israel blaming Netanyahu essentially for the killing of these hostages. I mean, we now know over 200 days into this war on Gaza that on October 9th and 10th, there was a deal on the table for a ceasefire in exchange for the release of the civilian hostages that Israel neglected. They said, we will, return these hostages to you in exchange that you don't begin this ground invasion into Gaza. And this has been reported in Israeli papers in the Times of Israel. And so the Israeli citizens are not happy with their government. The largest trade union with over 800,000 workers announced a general strike on Monday. This had a ripple effect into other industries where workers did not show up to work. The Ben Gurion airport, the main airport of Israel, was shut down. And we're seeing Israeli police use these kind of militarized police tactics on their own citizens who are protesting in the street. So it's really just a dire situation. The leadership of Israel clearly wants this war to continue when citizens in Gaza definitely, and in Israel, don't. And so what do we do when we have a rogue right-wing leader? The United States has pledged undying support. I think it's time we see a shift. And the UK pulling their support, their weapon shipments to Israel is a huge first step in that. It seems that things are finally going in that direction with the international community, specifically the West at this point.
Yeah. Are they going in that direction, though? We've heard from Biden for so long, that he supports what Israel's doing, that we're going to continue to support it. And he said that this talk that they were close to a hostage deal, that just comes as no comfort to the families and to the outraged people in Israel who are demanding accountability from their government. But whether the U.S. is going to exert, any pressure, or whether this just hardens Netanyahu toward, militaristic response that Joe Biden, and then if it's Kamala Harris in charge, is absolutely going to rubber stamp. Why should we have any indication that it's going to be different than that? They keep saying that they want incompatible things, that they want a ceasefire deal, but that they support Netanyahu's war against Hamas, and Netanyahu takes the position that Hamas must be destroyed and defeated, and because there can't be a lasting peace until then. And so they're at odds. So this is just going to continue indefinitely, as far as I can tell.
Right. The Israeli people want the hostages released. have not gotten that from Netanyahu. And so I think that's first and foremost. As much as they say they don't want Hamas to exist anymore, many of the Israeli people don't agree with Netanyahu's approach to ensuring that happens. Taking a ceasefire deal to bring the hostages home is something that's incredibly popular in the US and in Israel. And so the fact that now we see members of parliament in Spain, we see this decision by the UK, we are seeing, increased support across the West for, not Netanyahu, but what the people of Israel want. They want a ceasefire as well. It's not putting Israel in a particularly safe position to have Netanyahu not only invading the West Bank, but also now starting this conflict on the border of Lebanon, taking airstrikes in Iran and Syria. And Yemen as well. At this point in time, Netanyahu has been responsible for the escalatory steps that have so many people saying this could become a wider war in the Middle East. We have Russia potentially backing Yemen. We have US ships now in the region. This is not something that's good for the Israeli people or the Israeli citizens. And I think it's time that the United States and the West remembers that while they have an ally in Israel, that doesn't mean they have an ally in Netanyahu, because it seems that at this point, he's made it very clear he doesn't have the Israeli citizens' best interests in mind, the hostages' best interests in mind, certainly not the Palestinians' best interests in mind. And he's compromising, future peace, not just in the world, but in the region. And I think we're at the point where the United States has to make that calculation. And it reminds me of the turning point when the United States decided that it was time for apartheid to end in South Africa. And it didn't happen when the international community recognized apartheid was happening, just like the international community has recognized apartheid is happening in Palestine by Israel. That happened for many, many years before the United States decided to come around and say, yes, this is wrong. And that turning point happened when the tide turned in the country, when they were no longer in support of what their government was doing. And that was very clear. Nelson Mandela was on the terrorist watch list for many, many years before that happened. And so now that we're seeing such widespread unrest in Israel, I think now is at the point where the US is finally going to recognize what's going on and take some steps to withdraw support for Netanyahu. What that looks like in the future and who the leader of the country will be is the next big question.
Yeah. I mean, with the very, very unfortunate, very sad deaths of hostages, I mean, Hamas does, if we're being frank and realistic, Hamas loses some leverage every time this happens. And the, willingness of the Israelis, I think, to continue fighting them, it only solidifies, because we shouldn't mistake dissatisfaction with Netanyahu's leadership. Netanyahu obviously presided over this massive security failure. There have been credible allegations that he's, tacitly kind of supported the legitimacy of Hamas all along, because that delegitimizes the argument for Palestinian statehood and independence. The idea that they have a terrorist organization as their leadership helps him maybe make the case that there should not be a two-state solution. So there's a lot of frustration with his leadership, but I wouldn't mistake that necessarily for a desire among the Israeli people to make peace with the terrorist organization that are their neighbors. They wanted the hostages back, and Netanyahu has failed to deliver that. But if all the hostages die, there's less leverage for Israel to come to any sort of agreement with Hamas.
Yeah, I would categorize Netanyahu's actions around the hostages as weaponized incompetence. The security failures we saw on October 7th were shocking because we know that Israel has much better intelligence than honestly any other government in the world. The Mossad trains the CIA. And so this idea that they weren't aware that this attack was happening is something many people have called into question. And then you have the reality that he didn't want to solve this through diplomacy. He didn't want to say there will be no ground operation. Let's bring the hostages home. So why was the next step not a tactical operation, a precise operation to bring the hostages home, which Israel has demonstrated they have the capacity to do? So I think many people recognize that Netanyahu himself has been responsible for escalating the war. The way the ceasefire talks have gone in recent months and days is that you had a leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, killed. You have Israel consistently rejecting the terms of a ceasefire when the United States has urged them to do so, when Palestinians time and again have agreed to a ceasefire. And so we're now at this point where there is one person who's dragging on the conflict, and that's Netanyahu. And was the killing of these hostages, which was very different from what we've seen from Hamas throughout the war, at a time when over 9,000 Palestinians are unlawfully detained by Israel. You have Hamas making the decision to kill the hostages shortly before they were found in the tunnels by the IDF, almost making it, the reality. To many people who witnessed this, there's no other world where they didn't know the IDF was about to find them. So they executed these people on purpose. And so that break in their usual protocol with how they've been handling the civilian hostages, I think tells us a lot with how the conflict has been escalated, and that this was very likely a response to Israel's recent actions in months and days, the killing of the leaders, the invasion of the West Bank, and consistently rejecting the ceasefire deals on the table.
Stay tuned. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.